Karoline Leavitt was humiliated and forced to leave her seat. But just minutes later, the very flight attendant who had embarrassed her faced consequences no one could have anticipated. What happened on this flight would change everything. Not just for those on board, but for the entire airline. Before we dive into the story, comment where you're watching from and don't forget to subscribe so you never miss the latest updates. Karoline stepped onto the plane with an air of quiet confidence, drawing a few curious glances. She wore a tailored blazer over an elegant business skirt, her lightly curled hair framing her face. In one hand, she carried a sleek leather briefcase. In the other, she held her boarding pass. Moving leisurely down the aisle, she scanned the seat numbers with a composed, steady demeanor. When she reached her assigned first-class seat, she offered a polite smile to the passenger beside her, stowed her briefcase in the overhead bin, and sat down. Pulling out a small notebook and pen, she focused on her work, unaware of the fleeting glances cast her way. Moments later, Jessica Reed, a flight attendant, strode briskly through the cabin. Her crisp uniform and sharp gaze gave her an air of authority, as if she were sizing up every passenger. A self-proclaimed liberal, Jessica was known for openly criticizing the Trump administration on social media. When her eyes landed on Karoline, she froze. She instantly recognized her. Karoline Leavitt, a prominent conservative spokesperson she deeply despised. Jessica's demeanor stiffened. Approaching Karoline's seat, she stopped beside her and said in a polite but noticeably firm tone, "Excuse me, may I see your boarding pass?" Karoline looked up, slightly surprised but unshaken. She offered a faint smile and handed it over. "Of course," she said, her voice calm and assured. Jessica scanned the pass, her frown deepening. "This is a first-class ticket, right?" she asked, skepticism creeping into her voice. Karoline nodded. "That's right." Jessica hesitated for a brief moment before returning the pass without another word. But her clenched jaw and tight lips betrayed her discontent. She wasn't going to let this go easily. As Karoline returned to her notes, Jessica leaned toward another flight attendant near the galley, whispering something while casting irritated glances in Karoline's direction. The tension on her face was undeniable, as if Karoline's mere presence was an affront. Minutes later, Jessica returned, this time with an unmistakable air of authority. "Miss Leavitt, could you step aside for a moment? I need to check something," she said. Karoline blinked, surprised but still composed. She gathered her briefcase and followed Jessica toward the galley. Passengers in first class exchanged curious glances, whispering among themselves. Jessica crossed her arms. "I'm going to have to ask you to move to another seat," she said coolly. "There's been a mix-up with your booking." Karoline frowned slightly. "A mix-up? That's unlikely. I booked this ticket weeks ago and it was confirmed. Could you double-check?" Jessica's tone grew colder. "I already checked. I don't think this seat is appropriate for you. I'm asking you to move to economy." For the first time, a flicker of irritation crossed Karoline's face, but she quickly regained her composure. "My ticket is valid. Why do I need to move?" Jessica straightened, her expression turning icy and faintly mocking. "Ma'am, I'm sorry for the inconvenience, but I can't explain in detail right now. I feel uncomfortable with a conservative like you sitting in first class. You'll need to move, or I'll have to call security." Karoline's eyes narrowed slightly, but she said nothing. Instead, she nodded once and silently returned to her seat to gather her things. The cabin buzzed with murmurs as she walked toward the economy section, escorted by Jessica. Curious stares followed her, but she kept her head high, gripping her briefcase just a little tighter. In economy, Jessica pointed to a cramped middle seat. Karoline stowed her briefcase beneath it and sat down without a word. Jessica flashed a forced smile. "Thank you for your cooperation," she said before walking away. Karoline turned toward the window, her expression unreadable, but beneath the surface, her mind was working fast. She reached into her briefcase, pulled out her phone, and swiftly typed a message. After hitting send, a discreet smile flickered across her lips. As first-class service resumed, Jessica carried on as if nothing had happened. She checked on passengers, served drinks, and exchanged polite smiles. But something gnawed at her. Karoline's calm, her confidence, it unsettled her. The situation was resolved, or so she thought. Meanwhile, an economy-class flight attendant named Emily approached Karoline, holding a cup of water. Unlike Jessica, Emily had a warm, kind demeanor. "Ma'am, is everything okay?" she asked softly. Karoline looked up, offering a brief but reassuring smile. "I'm fine, thank you, just a minor mix-up." But Emily hesitated. She sensed there was more to the story. And soon, the entire airline would too. Karoline's composed demeanor prevented Emily from pressing further. "If you need anything, just let me know," Emily said, placing a cup of water on the tray before walking away. The flight continued, but Jessica remained oblivious to the ripple effect her actions had set in motion. Karoline, however, was fully in control. She leaned back in her seat, gazing out at the endless clouds, her fingers tapping rhythmically on the armrest. Outwardly, she was calm, but beneath the surface, a storm was brewing. She wasn't the type to let things slide, yet she didn't allow emotions to dictate her response. Precision over chaos. And her plan was already in motion. Minutes later, the plane's intercom crackled to life with a warm, professional voice. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for flying with us today. We wish you a comfortable journey. If you need assistance, please feel free to contact the crew." Karoline's gaze flicked forward, her expression unreadable. She pulled out her notebook, jotted a brief note, then snapped it shut decisively. Whatever was coming next, she was ready. The cabin settled into its usual rhythm. Passengers busied themselves with books, movies, or hushed conversations. But Karoline sat still, her outward calm tinged with quiet intensity. Jessica, meanwhile, carried on her duties with practiced ease, serving drinks and checking on passengers. A fleeting sense of triumph washed over her. The issue was settled and the discomfort was gone. But deep down, a nagging doubt lingered. Karoline unlocked her phone and typed a short, cryptic message. "They'll call soon. Let me know when it's done." She hit send, the screen's faint glow illuminating her composed face before disappearing into darkness. No one around her noticed, too preoccupied with their own world. Her lips curled into a subtle smile, but her sharp eyes held an unsettling confidence. At the galley, Jessica exchanged words with a fellow flight attendant, David, a seasoned veteran known for his even temperament. "Did you see that woman earlier?" Jessica asked, nodding subtly toward Karoline. David raised an eyebrow. "The one you moved to economy?" Jessica nodded. She had a first-class ticket, but something felt off. She didn't belong there. David frowned, crossing his arms. "Didn't belong? How so?" Jessica hesitated, searching for the right words. "Just a hunch. Better safe than sorry." "Right?" David's expression darkened. "A hunch isn't a reason to move someone. Did she do anything wrong?" Jessica faltered. "No, but—" David cut her off, his tone firm. "Then you better hope this doesn't backfire. First-class passengers don't like being messed with, neither does the airline." Before Jessica could respond, the galley phone rang. David picked it up, listening intently, his brow furrowed as he glanced at Jessica with a mix of curiosity and concern. "It's for you," he said, handing her the receiver. "They asked for you by name." Jessica's pulse quickened as she took the phone. "This is Jessica," she said cautiously. A firm, authoritative voice responded. "This is United Airlines operations. We've received a direct complaint regarding an incident involving a first-class passenger. You are to submit a detailed report upon landing. In the meantime, ensure all passengers are treated with respect, and no further seat changes occur without valid justification." Jessica's face paled. The weight of the words settled heavily on her shoulders. "Yes, of course," she stammered. "I'll handle everything properly." As she hung up, her hands trembled slightly. David watched silently, but her shaken expression spoke volumes. She tried to mask her unease, forcing herself to smile at passengers as she carried on with her duties, but her eyes kept drifting back toward Karoline. who sat in economy, eerily composed. Jessica couldn't shake the feeling that she had lost control of the situation. Meanwhile, Karoline checked her watch, then casually flipped through an in-flight magazine. To an outsider, she appeared relaxed, as if nothing had disrupted her day. But in her mind, every step was unfolding exactly as planned. Emily returned with a kind smile. "Ma'am, would you like anything? Water or a snack?" Karoline looked up, offering a warm but brief smile. "Just water, thank you." Emily nodded, returning promptly with a cup and a neatly folded napkin. "Let me know if you need anything else," she said gently. Karoline glanced at Emily's name tag and softened her gaze. "Thank you, Emily." Her tone was sincere. Emily returned the smile before walking away, unaware of the silent battle unfolding around her. Jessica, however, watched the exchange, from a distance, unease mounting in her chest. Karoline's calm interaction with Emily didn't fit the image Jessica had built in her mind. It unsettled her more than she cared to admit. She wanted to regain control, but she knew she had to. Tread carefully. The call from operations had made that clear. At 30,000 feet, the steady hum of the engines underscored the rising tension. Jessica returned to the galley, where David was preparing drinks for the next service. "Everything okay?" he asked, glancing. At her, Jessica hesitated. Then, forcing a nod, she muttered, "Fine," but David wasn't convinced. And deep down, neither was she. Jessica stiffened at David's warning but remained silent, turning back to arrange the cups. His words lingered in her mind, striking a nerve. Who was Karoline Leavitt really? And had she made a terrible mistake in misjudging her? At the same time, Karoline's phone buzzed faintly on her lap. She glanced at the screen, her expression unchanged. A short message appeared. "Everything's set. They're watching." Without hesitation, she stowed the phone in her briefcase, sipping her water with deliberate calm. To an outsider, she appeared serene, but there was an undeniable sense of control in her every move, as if she held the world in her hands. Across the aisle, a man leaned over, whispering, "That attendant really gave you a hard time, huh?" Karoline met his gaze, her face unreadable. "Nothing I can't handle," she replied softly. He raised an eyebrow, sensing something deeper, but didn't press further. Karoline turned back to the window, watching the endless stretch of clouds. A subtle satisfaction flickered in her eyes, hidden behind her calm exterior. The wheels were already in motion, and Jessica had no idea just how far the consequences of her actions would reach. A captain's warning. In first class, Jessica's unease deepened. Every minute stretched endlessly, the weight of the earlier call pressing down on her. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming, something beyond her control. The air felt heavier, though the flight remained smooth. She forced herself to keep busy, checking seatbelts and serving drinks, but every glance toward economy showed the same unsettling sight. Karoline, composed and unbothered. It made Jessica shiver. Then David approached, slipping a folded note into her hand. His expression was unreadable. "The captain wants to see you," he said quietly. Jessica's stomach dropped. "What? Why?" David shrugged, though his eyes held a warning. He didn't say, "Just go." Grumbling under her breath, she made her way to the cockpit. As the door closed behind her, she felt the weight of the room shift. Captain Harris, a middle-aged man with a calm but authoritative presence, turned to face her. The co-pilot barely glanced her way, focused on the controls. "Jessica," the captain began, his tone measured. "We just received another call from operations." Jessica's throat tightened. "Sir, He raised a hand to cut her off. "This is serious." His gaze locked onto hers. "The passenger you moved, Karoline Leavitt, she's not just anyone. She's connected to powerful people. We've been given direct orders to ensure she's treated with the utmost respect for the rest of this flight." Jessica's mouth went dry. I didn't know," she stammered. "I thought—" "You thought?" The captain's voice sharpened. "From where I'm standing, you acted without cause. That's not acceptable. She wanted to defend herself, but no words came. The captain exhaled, rubbing his temple. Here's the deal. You'll continue your duties and make sure no more incidents occur. When we land, you'll submit a full report to the ground team. Until then, do not approach Miss Leavitt unless absolutely necessary, understood? Jessica swallowed hard. Yes, sir. He nodded, dismissing her. Powerless. Jessica stepped out of the cockpit, her mind reeling. The humiliation burned in her cheeks as she returned to the galley, where David gave her a questioning look. She ignored him, grabbing a tray and forcing herself to move through the cabin. Her hands trembled slightly as she poured coffee for a first-class passenger, a few drops spilling onto the tray. She muttered a curse and wiped it away quickly. In economy, Karoline remained poised, composed as ever. As Jessica passed by, their eyes met for the briefest moment. There was no malice in Karoline's gaze, no smugness, just an unsettling calm, as if she already knew how this would end. Jessica quickened her pace, retreating to the galley once more. For the first time in her career, she felt utterly powerless, and she hated it. She had always trusted her instincts. But now, they had led her straight into disaster. Leaning against the counter, she gripped the edge tightly. David, prepping the snack cart, glanced at her. "You gonna tell me what's going on?" he asked, his tone cautious but firm. Jessica hesitated. Finally, she exhaled. "The woman I moved? She's connected. The captain just told me." David straightened. His expression shifted from curiosity to concern. "Connected how?" Jessica shook her head. "I don't know. But important." David folded his arms. "You serious?" She nodded, looking pale. "I had no idea." She hesitated. I don't even know what I thought." David's expression darkened. Didn't seem what? Like she belonged in first class? Jessica flinched. She didn't answer. Couldn't. David shook his head, disappointment flashing in his eyes before he turned back to the cart. A final move in the economy cabin, Karoline checked her watch. The flight was halfway through. No impatience crossed her face, just quiet calculation. She pulled out her phone, typing a brief message. "It's almost time." Then, just as effortlessly, she slipped the phone back into her briefcase and reached for her water. She took a slow sip, her expression unreadable. Jessica had played her move, and now it was Karoline's turn. Her voice was low and steady. "Look, whatever's going on, you better hope you didn't mess with the wrong person. First class isn't for amateurs." Jessica stiffened at the warning but didn't respond. Instead, she turned to arrange the cups, though her mind was elsewhere. David's words struck a nerve. Who was Karoline Leavitt, really? And why did she suddenly feel like she'd misjudged her? At that moment, Karoline's phone buzzed faintly in her lap. She glanced at the screen, her expression unreadable. A short message. "Everything's set. They're watching." Without hesitation, she stowed the phone in her briefcase and took a measured sip of water, exuding a quiet confidence as if she held the world in her hands. The tension between her and Jessica wasn't lost on a few observant passengers. A man across the aisle leaned in slightly, whispering, "That flight attendant really gave you a hard time, huh?" Karoline met his gaze, her expression neutral. "Nothing I can't handle," she replied softly. He raised an eyebrow, sensing something, deeper but choosing not to press further. Karoline turned back to the window, watching the endless clouds roll by. Behind her calm facade, a subtle satisfaction flickered in her eyes. The wheels were already in motion, and Jessica had no idea just how far the consequences of her actions would reach. First-class turbulence. In first class, Jessica's unease deepened. Each passing minute stretched endlessly, the weight of the earlier call pressing down on her. Something was coming, something she couldn't control. The air in the cabin felt heavier, though the flight remained steady. She tried to focus, moving mechanically through her duties, but her hands weren't as steady as before. Every glance toward economy showed Karoline still composed, exuding an effortless authority that sent a chill through Jessica. Karoline, meanwhile, remained unmoved. She gazed out the window, occasionally jotting notes in a small notebook. To an outsider, it was an ordinary act. But to Jessica, it felt deliberate, purposeful. Passengers began to take notice. Some exchanged whispers, though none dared voice the tension aloud. Jessica's discomfort peaked when David approached her in the galley, handing her a folded note. His expression was unreadable. "Captain wants to see you," he said quietly. Jessica's stomach clenched. "What? Why?" David shrugged, though his eyes held something close to disapproval. "He didn't say. Just go." Grumbling under her breath, she made her way to the cockpit. The door clicked shut behind her, sealing her off from the rest of the cabin. Captain Harris, a middle-aged man with an unshakable presence, turned to face her. The co-pilot glanced over briefly before returning his focus to the controls. "Jessica," Harris began, his tone even. "We just got another call from operations." Her heart sank. "Sir, He raised a hand, silencing her. "This is serious. The passenger you moved, Karoline Leavitt, isn't just anyone. She's connected to powerful people. We've been given direct orders to ensure she's treated with the utmost respect for the remainder of this flight." Jessica's mouth went dry. I didn't know," she mumbled. "You thought," Harris cut in, his voice firm. "Or assumed. Either way, from where I'm standing, you acted without cause. And that's not acceptable." Jessica's face burned with shame. The captain sighed, rubbing his temple. "Here's the deal. You'll continue your duties. Make sure no more incidents occur. When we land, you'll submit a full report. Until then, do not approach Miss Leavitt unless absolutely necessary. Understood?" Jessica swallowed hard. "Yes, sir." He nodded, dismissing her. She stepped out of the cockpit, her mind racing. Back in the galley, David shot her a questioning look, but she ignored him. She grabbed a tray, forcing herself to re-enter the cabin. Her hands shook slightly as she poured coffee for a first-class passenger. A few drops splashed onto the tray. "Damn it," she muttered under her breath, quickly wiping it away. In economy, Karoline remained unflinching. Jessica could feel her presence even when she wasn't looking. Their eyes met for a brief second as she passed. There was no malice in Karoline's gaze. No smugness. Just quiet, unwavering control. And that terrified Jessica more than anything else. The power shift, Jessica leaned against the galley counter, gripping the edge tightly. David, watching her closely, finally spoke. "You gonna tell me what's going on?" She hesitated, then exhaled sharply. "The woman I moved, she's connected. The captain just told me." David straightened, his curiosity shifting to concern. "Connected how?" "Important people," Jessica murmured. "I had no idea. I thought—" She trailed off, realizing how bad it sounded. David crossed his arms. "Thought what? That she didn't belong in first class?" Jessica said nothing. David shook his head. "I've worked for this airline for years. If you cross someone with real power, brace yourself. People like that don't let things slide easily." Jessica clenched her jaw. What was I supposed to do? She didn't seem what? David cut in, his voice sharp. Like someone rich enough? Like someone who should be up there? Jessica fell silent. David sighed heavily. "You should have left her alone. Now you've stirred up more trouble than you realize." A chime rang through the cabin. Jessica's heart leapt, but it was just the galley phone. She picked it up, her hand trembling slightly. "This is Jessica," she answered, trying to steady her voice. Captain Harris's voice came through. "We just received another communication from operations. They've requested that Miss Leavitt receive priority service for the remainder of the flight. Ensure she's comfortable, and personally apologize for the earlier inconvenience." Jessica's breath hitched. "Yes, sir," she managed before hanging up. She stood motionless for a moment, feeling the weight of the order pressed down on her. This wasn't a suggestion. It was a command. Gathering what composure she had left, Jessica stepped out of the galley with a tray in hand. Each step toward economy felt heavier than the last. When she reached Karoline's seat, she stopped. The tray quivered in her grip. Karoline's expression remained composed, unreadable. Jessica forced a smile. "Miss Leavitt," she began, her voice softer than it had been all flight. "I wanted to personally apologize for any inconvenience earlier. It was a misunderstanding on my part." Karoline tilted her head slightly, her gaze sharp yet calm. "A misunderstanding?" she echoed, voice low but steady. Jessica's forced smile faltered. "Yes. I didn't mean to disrupt your experience. Please accept this as an apology," she said, placing the drink on the tray table. Karoline didn't reach for it. Instead, she simply held Jessica's gaze, the moment stretching unbearably long. Then, finally, she spoke. "Apology accepted," she said, her voice smooth. But somehow Jessica knew this wasn't over, not by a long shot. Jessica placed the glass of soda on the tray in front of Karoline, her hand trembling slightly. Karoline studied the drink for a moment before shifting her gaze back to Jessica. "Thank you," she said simply, her tone unreadable. Then, with quiet finality, she added, "But I think it'll take more than a soda to settle this." Though spoken gently, the words hit Jessica like a slap. Her breath caught and her palms grew slick with sweat. "Of course," she stammered. "If there's anything I can do to make it right, please let me know." Karoline didn't respond immediately. She leaned back, watching Jessica with an almost clinical detachment, as if measuring her next move. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. Jessica shifted under the weight of it, her nerves fraying by the second. Finally, Karoline offered, a faint smile. Not smug, not gloating, just assured. "I appreciate your effort," she said, "but I trust United Airlines will handle this properly once we land." Jessica's stomach plummeted. The mention of the airline made one thing painfully clear. Karoline wasn't letting this go. I understand," Jessica whispered, lowering her gaze. "If you need anything else, please don't hesitate to let me know." Without waiting for a reply, she turned and hurried back to the galley, her face burning with humiliation. Her mind reeled, panic settling deep in her bones. In the galley, David raised an eyebrow as she leaned against the counter, pale and shaken. "How'd it go?" he asked. Jessica shook her head, her voice barely above a whisper. "She's not done. She's going to take this all the way." David exhaled, his expression grim. "I told you, people like her don't mess around. You should have been more careful." Jessica didn't reply. She stared at the curtain separating the galley from economy, her thoughts spiraling. For the first time, she understood. Karoline Leavitt wasn't just another passenger. She wielded power far beyond what Jessica had imagined. And now she was paying the price for underestimating her. Meanwhile, in economy, Karoline closed her notebook, slipping it into her briefcase with deliberate care. Adjusting her posture, she sat upright, calm and collected, as if preparing for what came next. The faint whispers of curious passengers buzzed around her, but she paid them no mind. Her focus remained unwavering. The intercom crackled to life. "Ladies and gentlemen, we'll begin our descent in a few minutes. Please fasten your seatbelts and raise your tray tables. Cabin crew, prepare for landing." The announcement stirred the cabin into motion. Passengers adjusted their seats, stowed their belongings, and murmured quietly. Emily, one of the flight attendants, approached Karoline with a polite, if slightly uneasy, smile. "Can I get you anything before we land, Miss Leavitt?" Karoline shook her head. "Thank you, Emily. You've been very attentive." Emily flushed slightly at the compliment. "If you need anything, just let me know," she said before moving on. In first class, Jessica busied herself with final pre-landing checks, her movements mechanical, her mind a storm of anxiety. The captain's orders and Karoline's words echoed, in her head like a drumbeat of impending doom. As the plane began its descent through the clouds, Karoline gazed out the window, watching the cityscape emerge below. Her fingers rested lightly on the armrest, her demeanor poised, unfazed. Unlike Jessica, she felt entirely in control. The landing was smooth, a sigh of relief rippling through the cabin as passengers unbuckled their seatbelts and gathered their belongings. Excited chatter filled the space, yet beneath it tension still lingered. Jessica felt it pressing down on her, suffocating. When the seatbelt sign turned off, Karoline remained seated, unhurried. She retrieved her phone from her briefcase and typed a quick message. Landed. Ready. Sliding the phone back into her bag, she glanced toward the front of the cabin. Jessica stood near the exit, forcing a smile as passengers streamed past. Then their eyes met. Jessica's stomach twisted. The cabin door opened, cool air from the jet bridge rushing in. Passengers filed out, rolling their suitcases, chatting, moving on with their lives. But Karoline didn't follow. She waited. Jessica watched, heart pounding, as Karoline finally stood, gathering her belongings with slow, deliberate movements. The moment of reckoning had arrived. Karoline maintained the same composed demeanor she had held throughout the flight as she approached the exit. The remaining crew, Emily and David included, exchanged discreet glances, sensing that something significant was about to unfold. When Karoline reached the exit, Jessica straightened, forcing herself to meet her gaze. "Thank you for flying with United Airlines, Miss Leavitt," she said, her voice trembling slightly. Karoline paused, her expression unreadable, but her piercing gaze sent a chill through Jessica. "I'm sure we'll be in touch," she replied smoothly, her tone carrying a weight that made Jessica's stomach tighten. Without another word, Karoline stepped off the plane, leaving Jessica frozen in place. David approached cautiously. "You okay?" he asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. Jessica didn't respond. Her eyes remained fixed on the exit, dread creeping up her spine. And she wasn't wrong. Moments later, 2 uniformed security officers stepped onto the plane. Their presence drew immediate attention, passengers and crew alike falling silent. They scanned the cabin before one of them locked eyes on Jessica. "Are you Jessica Reed?" he asked. Jessica's breath hitched. "Yes," she whispered. "We need you to come with us," the officer said firmly. "There are some questions regarding an incident on this flight." Jessica's face drained of color as the weight of her actions crashed down. She barely registered David's concerned expression as the officers escorted her off the plane. Around her, the remaining crew exchanged uneasy glances, uncertain of what would happen next. Outside the terminal, near the gate, Karoline Leavitt stood with her phone in hand, watching Jessica being led away. Her expression remained unreadable, her posture poised. The message she'd sent earlier had done its work, and now everything was falling into place. She turned toward baggage claim, her stride steady, purposeful. She didn't need to look back. The situation was entirely in her control. Inside the airport, Jessica sat in a small, sterile room. Just a table, 2 chairs, and a tension thick enough to choke on. The security officers stood near the door, their expressions firm but professional. Jessica's thoughts spiraled. Minutes ago, she had been a respected flight attendant. Now she was the subject of an investigation. The realization hit her like a punch. This wasn't just a misunderstanding. It was a calculated response. One of the officers broke the silence. "Miss Reed, we've been informed of an incident involving a first-class passenger. United Airlines. Management has requested a full report on your actions." Jessica swallowed hard, her throat dry. I don't know what this is about. I was just doing my job," she managed, though even to her own ears, the words sounded weak. The officer raised an eyebrow. "According to the report, the passenger you moved was Karoline L. Leavitt. Are you aware of her position?" Jessica's stomach dropped. I didn't know at first," she admitted, barely above a whisper. "I only found out during the flight." The officer leaned in slightly. Miss Leavitt isn't just the White House press secretary. She has significant influence in political circles. Her complaint reached the top, and the discrimination allegations are being taken very seriously. Jessica's breath came shallow. She opened her mouth to respond, but the words stuck in her throat. The officer's tone hardened. Miss Leavitt's statement has been recorded. Several passengers have corroborated her version of events. You have a chance to explain your side, but be clear. This is not being taken lightly. Jessica gripped the edge of the table, her hands trembling. She wanted to defend herself, to offer an explanation, but deep down, she knew the truth. No excuse would be enough. She had made a snap judgment, and now she was paying the price. Meanwhile, at baggage claim, Karoline stood near the carousel, her phone pressed to her ear. Her voice was calm, but there was a decisive edge to it. Yes, security took her in for questioning. Make sure my team reviews the footage and statements. I want this handled professionally but thoroughly. She listened for a moment, nodding slightly at the response. Thank you. Send me the final report via X. I want to ensure this never happens again, to me or anyone else. As the call ended, the first pieces of luggage rolled onto the carousel. Karoline stepped forward, effortlessly pulling her bag from the belt. With the same poised confidence that had carried her through the entire ordeal, she adjusted the strap over her shoulder and strode toward the exit. She had set the wheels in motion. Now it was only a matter of time. The composure Karoline had maintained throughout the flight never wavered as she approached the exit. The remaining crew, including Emily and David, exchanged discreet glances. Everyone sensed that something significant was about to unfold. As Karoline reached the door, Jessica straightened, forcing herself to meet her gaze. Thank you for flying with United Airlines, Miss Leavitt. Jessica cut in, her voice unsteady. Karoline paused, her expression unreadable, but her piercing eyes sent a chill through Jessica. I'm sure we'll be in touch, she replied smoothly, her tone carrying a weight that made Jessica's stomach twist. Without another word, Karoline stepped off the plane, leaving Jessica frozen in place. David approached cautiously. You okay? He asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. Jessica didn't respond, her eyes locked on the exit as if expecting something to happen. And she wasn't wrong. Moments later, 2 uniformed security officers boarded the plane. Their presence drew immediate attention as they scanned the cabin, then fixed their gaze on Jessica. Are you Jessica Reed? One of them asked. Jessica's breath hitched. Yes, she whispered. We need you to come with us, the officer said firmly. There are some questions regarding an incident on this flight. The blood drained from Jessica's face as the weight of her actions crashed down on her. David watched in silence as the officers escorted her off the plane. Her rigid posture betrayed her rising panic. Emily and the rest of the crew exchanged uneasy glances. No one knew what would happen next. Outside the terminal, Karoline Leavitt stood near the gate, phone in hand. She watched calmly as Jessica was led away, her expression unreadable. The message she had sent earlier had done its work, and now everything was falling into place. She turned and walked toward baggage claim with steady, purposeful strides. She didn't need to look back. The situation was firmly in her grasp. Inside the airport, the atmosphere buzzed with travelers, but for Jessica, everything felt muted. As she was escorted through the terminal, passengers from the flight whispered among themselves, sneaking glances but keeping their distance. At the security holding area, Jessica was led into a small, sterile room with a table and 2 chairs. The officers positioned themselves near the door, their expressions unreadable. The silence stretched, suffocating her. Finally, one of them spoke. Miss Reed, we've been informed of an incident involving a first-class passenger on your flight. United Airlines management has requested a full report on your actions. Jessica swallowed hard, her throat dry. I don't know what this is about. I was just doing my job. The officer raised an eyebrow. According to the report, the passenger you moved was Karoline L. Leavitt. Are you aware of her position? Jessica's heart sank. I didn't know at first, she admitted, her voice barely audible. I only found out during the flight. The officer leaned in slightly, his gaze unrelenting. Miss Leavitt isn't just the White House press secretary. She has significant influence in political circles. Her complaint reached the top and they're taking the discrimination allegations very seriously. Jessica's face turned ashen. She opened her mouth to respond but found no words. The officer's tone hardened. Her statement has been recorded, and multiple passengers have corroborated her version of events. You have a chance to explain your side. But be clear, this isn't being taken lightly. Jessica's hands gripped the table's edge, shaking. She wanted to defend herself, to justify her actions. But deep down, she knew the truth. She had made a snap judgment, one she could never take back. Meanwhile, at baggage claim, Karoline stood near the carousel, scrolling through her phone. A notification from her team caught her eye. Her post on X had gone viral. Thousands were calling for a boycott of United Airlines. A satisfied smile curved her lips. She hadn't sought revenge. She had sought change. And she had said it in Asian. Outside the airport, a sleek black sedan pulled up. The driver, dressed in a crisp suit, stepped out and opened the door. Miss Leavitt, he greeted with a nod. Everything has been arranged per your instructions. Karoline slid into the back seat with effortless grace. Thank you, James. As the car pulled away, she gazed out at the city skyline, her mind calm and clear. The day had been exhausting, but it had been necessary. Her phone buzzed again, a message from her assistant. The boycott is gaining momentum. United Airlines is scrambling. Karoline replied with a simple directive. Good. Make sure this never happens again. Back at the airport, Jessica sat alone in the cold room, her thoughts spiraling. The weight of her suspension, the looming investigation, and the crushing realization of what she had done bore down on her. Her phone buzzed. Hesitantly, she picked it up. A message from United Airlines HR. Short, unforgiving. Jessica, please. Prepare to attend a disciplinary hearing at 9 a.m. tomorrow. Details will follow via email. Her hands trembled as she read it. The hearing wasn't just a formality. It was the airline's way of protecting its reputation, and Jessica knew she was the one they were going to sacrifice. At that same moment, Karoline's car reached the White House. She stepped out with the same composure she had maintained all day. Inside, her assistant, Sarah, greeted her with a stack of documents. Initial social media reaction, crew statements, and the boycott wave, she reported. United Airlines is in full damage control. Karoline flipped through the pages, nodding. They know this can't be covered. Up. The pressure will force change. Sarah hesitated. Do you think the flight attendant will push back? Karoline considered the question. Maybe, she said finally, closing the folder. But it's not about her anymore. It's about the system that allows people like her to feel comfortable acting on political bias. And that, Karoline knew, was what truly needed to change. Admiration filled the air. You've made a huge impact. United Airlines is in chaos because of you. Karoline gave a small smile but said nothing. She knew the work wasn't done. Changing a system required persistence, and she had plenty of it. At the airport, Jessica finally stood, her legs shaky as she left the holding room. She avoided the eyes of security and colleagues, her uniform now feeling like a burden rather than a badge of honor. The walk to her car was a march of shame, each step a reminder of a career hanging by a thread. Sitting behind the wheel, she stared at her hands, her mind reeling. She had spent years building a reputation as a dedicated flight attendant, and now, in a matter of hours, it was unraveling. She thought of Karoline, calm, composed, untouchable. The realization hit her like a blow. Karoline had never lost control. From the moment Jessica made her first mistake, the power had been in her hands. For the first time, Jessica felt something beyond anger or frustration. A deep regret settled in her chest. She had underestimated Karoline Leavitt, not just as a passenger, but as a person. And now she was paying the price. As Jessica drove away from the airport, Karoline sat in her White House office reviewing documents from Sarah. Her phone buzzed. Another message, this time from a senior Trump advisor requesting a meeting to discuss the United Airlines incident and next steps. She typed a brief reply. I'll arrange a time for tomorrow morning. Ensure this is handled properly. Setting the phone down, she leaned back in her chair, her mind already turning to the future. The day had been draining, but it had also opened a door, an opportunity to reshape an institution. And for Karoline, that was a fight worth taking. On the next morning, sunlight streamed through her office blinds as she prepared for the meeting. She had spent the night reviewing documents, drafting statements, and considering the broader impact of the incident. This wasn't just about addressing her personal experience, it was about setting a precedent. No one, regardless of position or ideology, should face the treatment she had. At precisely 10 a.m., Sarah ushered in the advisor, Robert Kane. He was a tall man with graying hair, his confidence tinged with unease. As he shook Karoline's hand, his tone was careful. Miss Leavitt, he began. Thank you for meeting me on short notice. Karoline nodded, her gaze steady. I appreciate you taking this situation seriously, Mr. Kane. Please, have a seat. Robert adjusted his tie as he spoke. First, I want to offer my deepest apologies for what happened on your flight. It was unacceptable, and we're committed to ensuring it doesn't happen again. Karoline's expression remained unwavering. I'm glad to hear that. However, an apology isn't enough. This wasn't just one flight attendant making a bad call. It's an environment that allowed her to believe she could. Robert's face tightened slightly, but he nodded. You're right. United Airlines has faced intense pressure from your post. We're reviewing all policies and implementing bias training for staff. Karoline studied him for a moment. That's a start, but it's not enough. I want a detailed timeline for these changes, along with regular progress updates. I expect tangible results. Robert hesitated before nodding. Of course, we'll provide everything you need. A small smile curved Karoline's lips. Good. Make sure this is a turning point for United Airlines, not just a temporary fix. The meeting stretched, on for another hour, with Karoline laying out expectations and Robert taking diligent notes. As they stood to shake hands, Robert's eyes now reflected something new. Genuine respect. Thank you for holding us accountable, he said. We'll make this right. Karoline gripped his hand firmly. I'll be watching to ensure that. As Robert left, Sarah stepped into the office, her eyes bright with curiosity. How did it go? Karoline exhaled, her tone a mix of relief and determination. Well, but this is just the beginning. While Karoline's meeting unfolded, Jessica Reed sat in a cold conference room at United Airlines headquarters, awaiting the start of her disciplinary hearing. The weight of her suspension hung over her like a dark cloud, the room's silence amplifying her anxiety. Before her was a stack of papers, each one documenting her actions on the flight, each one detailing Karoline Leavitt's formal complaint. The door opened, and 3 senior executives entered, their faces neutral but unyielding. A woman with sharp features and an air of authority spoke first. Miss Reed, thank you for coming. We're here to discuss the incident on the flight from Dulles and the allegations against you. Jessica nodded weakly, her throat dry. I understand. The executives began reviewing the timeline of events, asking her to present her side. She tried to explain, but even to her own ears her words felt hollow. I thought she might have been in the wrong seat, Jessica said, her voice faltering. I was just trying to follow procedure. The woman raised an eyebrow. Procedure? According to the records, Miss Leavitt had a valid first-class ticket. When did you verify this? Before asking her to move. Jessica hesitated, her hands clammy. I didn't, she admitted. Silence filled the room, heavy and damning. Another executive, a middle-aged man with glasses, leaned forward. Miss Reed, United Airlines has a zero-tolerance policy on discrimination. Your actions not only violated that policy, but jeopardized our reputation. Do you understand the severity of this? Jessica nodded slowly, the weight of it sinking in. I do. The hearing continued, the questioning relentless. By the end, Jessica felt utterly drained. The final decision would be delivered in writing, but she already knew the outcome. Her career at United Airlines was over. As she left the room, her thoughts were consumed by Karoline, the poised woman who had held her dignity intact even as Jessica had tried to strip it away. For the first time, Jessica felt the full weight of her actions, not just on her career but on the person she had wronged. She had wanted to blame the system, but now she realized she had been part of it. She could have blamed the system, the circumstances, or even her instincts, but deep down she knew the truth. She had made a choice, and now she had to face the consequences. That afternoon, Karoline sat in her White House office, sipping tea as she scanned an email from her team. The message was clear. The boycott against United Airlines had sent their stock into freefall, forcing the company's leadership to act. Attached were reports detailing the public backlash and the airline's plan for staff retraining. It was a small but meaningful victory. Karoline allowed herself a brief moment of satisfaction. Her phone buzzed, pulling her from the screen. A text from Sarah. "Jessica Reed has been officially fired. Thought you'd want to know." Karoline set down her teacup, staring at the message. It didn't bring joy or a sense of closure. She wasn't one to gloat, and Jessica's firing was merely a symptom of a larger issue. But it was necessary, a reminder that actions have consequences. As she leaned back in her chair, Karoline reflected on the whirlwind of the past 24 hours. This wasn't just about a personal slight. It was about setting a precedent, not only for United Airlines, but for anyone who thought they could act without accountability. A hard lesson, that night, in a small apartment across the city, Jessica Reed sat in silence, the termination notice from United Airlines resting on her table. She had spent hours replaying the hearing, searching for justifications but found none. The reality was inescapable. Her political bias had cost her everything. Messages from friends and family poured in, a mix of pity and judgment. But Jessica couldn't bring herself to respond. The weight of her mistake was crushing. The years she had spent building her career now felt meaningless. She turned on the TV, hoping for a distraction, only to be met with a news segment on workplace discrimination, as if the universe itself was forcing her to confront her actions. The segment featured a brief interview with Karoline Leavitt, speaking with sharp clarity about the importance of systemic change and corporate accountability. Jessica stared at the screen, her chest tightening. Karoline's calm, composed presence stood in stark contrast to her own turmoil. For the first time, Jessica didn't see Karoline as an adversary, but as someone who had every right to demand better. Shutting off the TV, she sat in the dark, lost, in thought. She couldn't undo the past, but maybe, just maybe, she could learn from it. She reached for her laptop, opening a new email, not to defend herself, but to apologize. Not just to Karoline, but to everyone affected by her actions. For the first time in days, Jessica felt a glimmer of clarity. A sincere apology. A week later, Karoline received an unexpected email forwarded from her team. Subject: apology from former employee. Curious, she opened it. It was from Jessica Reed. "I owe you an apology. My actions on that flight were inexcusable. I acted on assumptions instead of facts and failed to recognize you, a valued passenger and, more importantly, a person, deserving of respect. My behavior reflected poorly not just on me but on United Airlines. I'm truly sorry." Karoline read carefully, noting the sincerity in Jessica's words. Jessica admitted that the fallout had forced her to deeply reflect on her actions and biases. She expressed her intent to educate herself and to be better. This experience has been humbling. The changes you're advocating for aren't just necessary at United Airlines but everywhere. I hope my mistake, though inexcusable, can serve as an example of what needs to change. I'm committed to learning and not repeating this error. Thank you for holding me accountable. Karoline leaned back, considering the words. She wasn't naive. Apologies could sometimes be a way to ease guilt. But something about Jessica's letter felt genuine. After a moment, she typed a brief reply. "Thank you for your message. Taking accountability is the first step to growth. I hope you continue on this path and turn this experience into positive change. Hitting send, Karoline closed her laptop and gazed out her office window. This wasn't just about personal justice, it was about creating a ripple effect. Jessica's apology didn't erase what had happened, but it hinted at the possibility of change. And sometimes, small steps led to something greater. A shift in the skies weeks passed, and the domino effect of the United Airlines controversy became evident. The boycott, fueled by Karoline's exposé, had plunged the airline into crisis. Stocks plummeted, flights were canceled en masse, and under immense pressure, especially from conservatives and Trump supporters, the airline's leadership publicly acknowledged its failures. United Airlines announced mandatory anti-bias training for all staff. But the fallout didn't stop there. The scandal sent shockwaves through the airline industry, forcing other carriers to reevaluate their policies. Some even reached out to Karoline for advice. She declined most, choosing instead to ensure United Airlines faced the full consequences. For Karoline, this wasn't about personal recognition. It was about lasting impact. One afternoon, as she prepared for a work-related flight, she noticed a subtle yet meaningful shift in the atmosphere at the airport. Airline staff were more attentive, their smiles more genuine. Passenger interactions were handled with patience and care. At the boarding gate, employees immediately recognized her. "Miss Leavitt, welcome back. We've upgraded your seat as a thank you for your continued support." Karoline smiled at the gesture but politely declined. "Thank you, but I'm fine where I am." Her confidence and humility commanded respect, not because she demanded it, but because she had earned it. As she boarded, she noticed something else. The crew's engagement with passengers had changed. Flight attendants were more present, more mindful. Near the front, she spotted a familiar face. Emily, the only attendant who had shown kindness during the incident. Emily caught Karoline's eye and smiled. A silent look passed between them. One of mutual respect. Moments like this reminded Karoline why she had fought so hard. Small gestures, multiplied over time, could shift an entire culture. A new beginnings. As the plane ascended, Karoline leaned back in her seat, reflecting on everything that had happened. She thought of Jessica's apology, the boycott, and the messages of support from thousands who had followed the story online. It was humbling. It was powerful. And somewhere in the city, Jessica was beginning a new chapter. She had taken a job at a nonprofit focused on workplace diversity, using her experience as a lesson for change. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, and she knew she had much to prove, but for the first time she felt a sense of purpose beyond herself. At 30,000 feet, Karoline pulled out her notebook and flipped to a blank page. She wrote a single line. Change begins with accountability, but it grows through persistence. Closing the book, she allowed herself a rare moment of peace. She knew the fight wasn't over. There was still much work to be done. But as she gazed out at the sky stretching endlessly before her, Karoline felt something unexpected. Hope. The incident had been painful, but it had sparked something far bigger than herself. And in that moment she knew, without a doubt, the sky wasn't the limit. It was just the beginning.